You are here because a chain of women, stretching back further than anyone can count, survived the single most dangerous thing a human body can do. Not childbirth in general, your specific birth, your mother's, hers before that. Thousands of them in a row, no exceptions. Going back to the very first humans, and every single one of those births happened without a hospital, without a doctor, and for most of that chain, without a single tool sharper than a rock. If even one of them had gone wrong in a way nobody knew how to fix, you simply wouldn't exist. That's not a metaphor. That's the actual math. So here's the real question. Human birth is famously, uniquely difficult, harder and riskier than almost any other primates. So how did a species with no medicine survive doing the hardest version of the hardest thing over and over for 300,000 years? The honest answer isn't luck. It's a system. And it's more sophisticated than you'd expect. Here's something most people assume without ever questioning it, that childbirth has always been roughly this dangerous for every species, and humans just have to deal with it. That assumption is wrong. Anthropologist Wenda Trevathan, who spent decades studying the evolution of human birth, calls this the obstetrical dilemma. Human babies are born with unusually large heads because we evolved unusually large brains. At the same time, walking upright on two legs narrowed the shape of the human pelvis. Those two things, big heads, narrow hips, collided head-on, and the result is that human birth became one of the tightest, most complication-prone squeezes in the entire animal kingdom. Almost every other mammal gives birth alone and unassisted. A deer wanders off, has her fawn, and rejoins the herd within hours. Human birth doesn't work that way, and Trevathan's research suggests it never really has. She and colleague Karen Rosenberg proposed something called the assisted birth hypothesis, the idea that human babies are positioned in a way that makes it extremely difficult, and often physically impossible, for the mother to reach down and guide the baby out herself the way other primates can. In other words, evolution didn't just make human birth harder, it made human birth a two-person job, minimum by design. Which means the story of how ancient humans survived pregnancy isn't really a story about individual toughness. It's a story about who was in the room. Long before anyone understood hormones, ancient women were already reading their own bodies with startling accuracy, and one of the strangest tools they had for this was nausea. In 1992, biologist Margie Profit published a paper in the Quarterly Review of Biology, arguing that morning sickness isn't a malfunction, it's a defense. Her theory, now widely discussed in evolutionary medicine, is that pregnancy sickness spikes hardest during the first trimester, exactly when a developing embryo is most vulnerable to toxins, and makes women acutely sensitive to the smells and tastes most associated with spoiled meat, bitter plants, and other natural poisons. Under this theory, the women who felt the most nauseated weren't unlucky. They were protected. Nobody in the ancient world could have explained the biochemistry. They didn't need to. The aversion did the explaining for them, and it got quietly folded into tradition. Pregnant women don't eat that. Given everything we just covered, the obstetrical dilemma, the assisted birth hypothesis, it makes sense that almost no ancient birth happened in isolation, but the scale of the support system goes further than most people expect. Across documented hunter-gatherer societies, birth was consistently attended by other women, mothers, sisters, and especially older women who had been through it multiple times themselves and had in effect become the group's informal specialists. This wasn't casual company. These attendants actively managed the birth, reading the baby's position through touch, guiding posture, and using upright positions, squatting, kneeling, leaning on another person's body. That modern obstetric research has since confirmed use gravity and pelvic alignment far more effectively than lying flat, which is a relatively recent convenience, not a biological default. We often assume primitive methods must have been worse than modern ones by default. But in this specific case, the ancient default, upright, supported, attended, lines up closely with what current research recommends. It's not that they knew less, it's that somewhere along the way we forgot what they knew. This is the hardest part of the story, and it deserves an honest answer, not a comforting one. Sometimes it didn't work. For most of human history, complications in pregnancy and childbirth were a leading cause of death for young women, and no amount of inherited knowledge could fix a severe hemorrhage or a baby positioned wrong with the tools available. But ancient communities weren't passive in the face of that risk. Across cultures, women accumulated plant-based remedies through generations of trial and error. Some used to try to ease pain, others believed to control bleeding or speed a stalled labor. Some of these, tested much later by modern pharmacology, turned out to have genuine active compounds. Others almost certainly worked through belief and ritual rather than chemistry. Nobody at the time could fully tell the difference. In a world with no alternative, sometimes it works, was still worth doing. What's remarkable isn't that they solved it, it's that they never stopped trying to. Here's the twist the data keeps pointing to. The single biggest factor in ancient birth survival probably wasn't a plant, a posture, or a technique at all. It was people. A pregnant woman in most hunter-gatherer societies wasn't just supported during labor itself. She was supported for months before and after. Other members of the group took on more of the physically demanding work so she could conserve energy. Food was shared disproportionately toward mothers and children. This pattern, sometimes called cooperative breeding, shows up again and again in anthropological research as one of the defining features of human child rearing, and researchers increasingly believe it's a major reason our species, with its uniquely helpless infants, was able to survive at all. The tribe wasn't a backup plan. The tribe was the actual medical system. For all our machines and monitors, there's a strange and slightly uncomfortable finding buried in recent obstetric research. Some of the practices modern hospitals are now reintroducing, upright birthing positions, continuous one-on-one support, movement during labor, aren't new discoveries. They're rediscoveries. We didn't invent surviving birth. We spent a few centuries forgetting pieces of a system that already worked, and we're just now starting to hand some of them back. So the next time someone calls ancient humans primitive, remember what actually got you here. Not luck. Not one lone woman gritting her teeth through it alone. A chain of knowledge, of attention, of hands that weren't hers reaching in when it mattered. They didn't have hospitals. They had each other, and for 300,000 years, that was enough to get you here.